Introducing Jennifer Birdie Shawker. She currently serves at Connolly Memorial Medical Center as a chaplain. She also serves at Unity of Bourne in Communications. She served at Unity of San Antonio for 8 years as the communications coordinator. Prior to this, she served as Youth and Family Ministry Director at Unity Spiritual Center San Angelo for 10 years. She has also served at Unity Spiritual Center Corpus Christi. She's completed a unit of clinical pastoral education through Baptist Hospital System in San Antonio, Texas. Birdie is a registered nurse and has worked in many settings, including hospitals, home health, and psychiatric care for over 25 years. Birdie has completed Unity's Spiritual Education Enrichment Program, and she resides in Floresville, Texas, with her husband Frank, son Ryan, and a plethora of pets. Without further ado, here to speak about the strange pull, Jennifer Birdie Shawker.
Good morning. Thank you for such a wonderful introduction, and thank you so much for having me come speak. And I really appreciate the very specific request to speak about my experiences with COVID-19 through a spiritual lens. I'm profoundly grateful. It gave me an opportunity to really sit back and think about the past year in depth. So I'm just really thankful for that. Today's message is entitled "The Strange Pull," and I entitled it "The Strange Pull" because early in the pandemic, I realized what I truly love may be considered kind of strange to some people. Early in the pandemic, I was at the hospital where I serve as a chaplain. I was pulled into the administrator's office probably about a year ago this week, and he had some regulations upon his desk. He had some papers, and he said, I want to let you know that a state of emergency has been declared in the state of Texas. And in the state of Texas, when there's an emergency, chaplains only serve on an as-needed basis. So you're going to need to go home. And I mean, I had just walked in the door 10 minutes earlier. So I was as you could imagine, I was taken aback. And as I packed my things up and walked out to the car, I was in this state of disbelief, profound grief at leaving my colleagues behind, confusion, fear. I said, I need to talk to somebody about this. So I called a minister I knew, because I thought a minister would be able to empathize with this, but I called a pulpit minister. So it was probably not the right minister to call. And so I got in my car and I called this minister who cares deeply about me. And I told them, I'm in the car and they're sending me home from the hospital. And I expected this maybe more empathetic response of, oh, that must be so hard for you, whatever. And what I heard on the other line was, good. Of course, he, cares about me. And then I realized, oh, not everybody has the perception that I do and has this. I don't know so much if it is a strange pull per se, as it is an inward push from my deepest self towards what I truly love. And a lot of things have changed for me in the past year. One of the things that was very challenging for my classmates, but really appeals to me as a chaplain, what we do in the hospital is we serve people within their spiritual framework. There is no need for me to inflict my beliefs upon another person. Most of my classmates have struggled with that at one point or the other, but I never particularly did. And I think that's a mix of just, I'm a very curious person, but perhaps at times my beliefs have been a little wishy-washy. Like, I know what I know, but why don't I know what I know? We've all been there. Doubt happens. And that's just an important kind of thing to file for later on in the message. Now, I know you all wanted me to focus on kind of the spiritual realizations I've come to, but I'm going to do a little bit of a kind of show and tell to kind of tell you about a little bit about my day. By now, I hope you have seen on media what the nurses and doctors are going through. I hope you have turned into the news, where there's often news stories about what an ICU looks like and feels like in this day and age. But I'm just going to show you a few little things to kind of describe my life in there. This is my badge. If you turn it one way, I'm a chaplain. And if you turn it the other, I'm an RN. Now, this is a very unusual situation. One would not normally serve in the same hospital as a chaplain and an RN because they're very different jobs and boundaries are really important. But I've been asked to help give vaccines, and it's an emergency and it's a pandemic and it's an all hands on deck kind of situation. I had a tiny little job in another place in the restaurant industry as an occupational health nurse, and I actually did lose my job as a result of the pandemic. This is my magic paper bag, and you may have seen similar things on social media, especially at the beginning of the pandemic when we were running short of PPE. You may have seen the nurses dressing themselves up in garbage bags to be safe and things like that. See, once upon a time, we were told that this mask, which goes over your nose and face, and it's an N95 mask, and it's very tight upon your face, was one use only. And it's not one use only at my hospital. I think a lot of the public has the impression that everything's all better in the hospital. I use this 4 times and I write the dates down that I've used it, put it back in the bag, which is supposed to help with germs, and put it in recycling. And for me, it just kind of represents this sense of betrayal that we felt, a lot of healthcare providers felt. We all took epidemiology in school. We were ready to serve in a difficult time, but the expectation was we would have the tools to do it. Between that and some of the things you see on social media with people kind of minimizing the impact of the pandemic, and just the times I have served as a nurse and been out in the community in my scrubs, most people are so profoundly grateful for our service. But some people see us, especially if we're in scrubs and that RN badge is on, and they don't mean to do it, I'm sure, but their feelings about the pandemic kind of come out sideways and towards us. The other thing I wanted to show you is this is and I hope you can see it, this is a vial of oil. And this is one of my biggest tools as a chaplain. This is anointing oil. It comes from the Holy Land. And it's scented with myrrh, which is what one of the gifts the Magi gave the baby Jesus. And it was used at the beginning of his life, and it was used at the end of his life, and in many faith traditions it is used at the end of life. So this vial is something I've had for 2 whole years. I've been a chaplain for 2 years. And with this stuff, a little dab will do ya, like they say with Elmer's glue, right? It's pretty potent stuff. So my first year, I maybe used this much, just a little bit at the top. It's now this empty. There's just a little bit left at the bottom. That's how many people it represents, probably better than any statistic, how many people that have been anointed at the time of their passing. Now, do I personally go in and anoint them? No, I work in collaboration with the nurses, and I put it on a little piece of gauze, and they go in and anoint them as, I might say, a blessing on the other side of the ICU glass. And I got to just say, I'm profoundly grateful for nurses because their scope of practice is unique in all of the medical world. I don't know if you know this about them, but they tend to people body, mind, and spirit. And so this can be part of their work, and prayer can be part of their work if you request it of them. So, you know, in a typical day, I might go in and center And I can't even use that bottle of oil anymore. I had to get a new bottle, by the way. Every time I look at it, it pulls at me in a really profound manner, because I've never had this happen to me before the pandemic, but I have kind of this experience of remembering a lot of the deaths that I've attended to. And by the way, I use the word death because I don't mind it. I know a lot of people like to use the word transition, and I like that word too. But death is something that happens in the human experience and encompasses that experience of transition. So just know that if I'm saying death, it also encompasses transition. I go into work and I immediately center. I go into the chapel and I center and I pray, and I take the prayer requests and I take them into my office. And throughout my day, I go to rounds, I listen, I prioritize who needs to be seen first. And I go about my day. And what a chaplain does, like I said, is minister to people within their spiritual framework. Their work is being a non-anxious presence. So it is we empower and nurture people through presence. We listen empathetically, which is a spiritual practice in and of itself. We may do sacraments if people ask for them. We may provide hospitality. We may, families are parched sometimes when they're visiting, although that's not as big a deal right now because families aren't there, and I'll go into it. So my day is a series of ritual. I have had to learn to rest and pause more frequently than maybe I had to before, and perceive things a little differently. When I walk through a doorway and I'm in a hallway, I perceive a hallway maybe as a very spiritual place. And breathe. There's a lot of breath going on. So I have some new rituals and practices. And one might naturally think, oh, well, she's having to work so much harder because my hospital is small. It has 50 beds. It's been slammed like every hospital across the country, taking care of at times 4 or 5 more times the caseload that we would normally have. So I've really had to learn and pause and have new practices, including when I get home from work. Like many healthcare professionals, I know if I've walked into that ICU where we've run out of isolation rooms, I need to wear that N95 mask, and I've been exposed. So at the end of the day, my wonderful husband, Frank, meets me at the door every shift with a robe. And I got to say, my husband has never questioned the strange pull. And he may at times complain about things, but he has never complained about my occupation. He has never complained about the risk to him. He has just loved on me so much. And so I come home, he has a robe for me. I go into the garage and take every stitch of clothes off and put it in the washing machine, and then go and take a shower. And the shower reminds me of maybe in Judaism, the ritual of the mikvah, the cleansing. And this has been very helpful because it puts me in touch with my body. At the end of the day, I'm not always in touch with how exhausted I am. But with this pause and this water just kind of coming down on me, kind of rinsing away my day, and I sit on the edge of my bed when I'm done, and I'm like, oh, I am so tired. I need to rest. And I've never rested more in my life than this time. And I think rest is a very spiritual thing too. Like I said, and I'm just so by the way, I'm just so grateful to my husband. I can't say that enough. He's been amazing through all of this. Another practice that has changed for me, like I said, if my practices got more involved or ornate in this time, I just wouldn't have time for them. So everything's simpler. I am a fan and friend of the 12-step programs, and in particular, personal inventories, which can be very, very involved. And I learned about this personal inventory practice. That is something that the Tibetans do. So what's sitting on my lap is a bowl of rocks. There's some black rocks like this, And then there's some clear rocks like this. So if I feel like I really need to review my day and examine what I've done, what I do is I sit with these rocks, and every time a point of light from my day comes up in my mind, I start a pile of white rocks. And every time there's a point in my day where I could have done better, I put down a black rock. Inevitably, almost every time, the white rocks are, and I think this is true for most people that engage in this practice, the white rocks are bigger pile than the black rocks. And when I really sit and think about each black rock, the person I've probably harmed the most is myself, and holding myself accountable probably to unrealistic expectations, and the realization to really work on my sense of worthiness and gentleness and compassion and self-care. Now, a very popular type of prayer is what some people in New Thought call affirmative prayer. I like declarative prayer a little better, using that term, because it's a bit more universal. New Thought does not have the corner in the market on saying statements of truth, right? Just about every faith tradition in the world has that kind of prayer. So in my declarative prayers, I was once very fond of what we might call in Texas $100 words. Pretty fancy. I get in the thesaurus and write like these huge long sentences. So my affirmations and then denials, which are statements that help us understand that certain things don't have power over us, could be as short as 4 words. Like I said before, I get a metric ton of sleep and self-care like I've never had before. And one of the most important changes in my practice life is the realization that my occupation is a practice, because I was beating myself up over this less fancy spiritual life at home, this really simplified, streamlined kind of spiritual life. But in addition to my practices at home, my day is a living practice. My new practice of the shower, which is like my mikvah, the rituals and sacraments I provide for the patients, the rest that I take in between patients, listening empathetically is truly a practice, and a worthy one. And there's lots of information out there about it that is worth taking up. And that calm, non-anxious presence. And I think the biggest practice, I'm just going to set these stones over here. I think the biggest change in my practices has come out of necessity in the time of COVID-19. And that is around when I am tending to someone at the time of their transition or their death. Death is sometimes horrible, sometimes peaceful, and all of it needs to be acknowledged. And in the time of COVID-19, with COVID-19 patients, it mostly occurs in the ICU. We have a regular floor with an isolation unit where I actually don't go. I call those patients because there's only one chaplain in my hospital. In other hospitals, they might have a whole team and might have more PPE than a rural hospital would, but I don't actually, I talk to them on the phone, much like the Silent Unity Ministry might do, and pray and talk with them and listen on the phone. But death usually occurs on the ICU. And the way it typically plays out is either I or the nurse have talked to the family about what's about to occur, and come to a consensus as to how things are to be handled. And the thing that we've heard over and over again throughout this year is on the phone, please don't let my family member die alone. And I say, of course we won't let them die alone. So in the past, death was something that was also tended to usually with the family. It's different now. I'm in the ICU, and what I do is I can't go in the room with the patient. Of course, we know that there's no separation in spirit. But I've had to work really hard spiritually on really knowing what I know and not questioning, do I really know that? So I'll pull up a chair next to the glass with the person. And to be honest with you, the nurses will go in and set everything up. And if any kind of treatment needs to be withdrawn, it is at that time, and they make the person comfortable. And I'm usually sitting in the chair while that's going on and settling in and settling into an awareness of our oneness. And then when the nurses come out, I do honestly kind of scan how they're doing, because a chaplain ministers, or a chaplain supports and empowers. I'm sorry, sometimes I use old-fashioned words because I'm in Texas, and that's the language of the people I serve, that they understand. But I also view what I do as a nurturing and empowering kind of thing. So we empower the staff as well as families. And so I might scan the room and say, hey, how you feeling? Because sometimes they need their feelings validated, and sometimes they're okay. So then I settle in more deeply. Usually a transition is a time where people don't chit chat. This is work, this dying process. And it's usually a quiet one. May say a few words, may say a prayer, but largely that presence, that calm, non-anxious presence is all that it takes. Well, how do I stay in a calm, non-anxious space? It's been a struggle, I'm new to this, I'm learning this. Sometimes I would be in the extreme of acknowledging the sorrow and the pain and the grief that is going on, which is super important, especially when a family is present, and to be empathetic to that. And sometimes I'd be way off on the other extreme of trying to, of the truth, right? The greatest truth about death is that there is life after death. I mean, just about every faith tradition agrees on that. Now, after that, the story changes. It goes off in the direction of heaven or reincarnation or whatever. But there is this very luminous truth that there is life after death. And at times, I've been clinging and going, okay, I know what I know. I know it. And it would kind of be a struggle at times for me. And it's not as much of a struggle for me. And what I have found is, more often than not, when I'm sitting in this space next to this patient, with this patient, trying to be present for this individual that is making their transition, is that I've found this place where I honor and am present to the sorrow, to pain, to the suffering, to the grief, honoring that, acknowledging that, fully present to it, but also at the same time present to that very luminous truth about life after death, about the absolute, and that's at play here. That aspect of all of us that is unchanging, whole and complete. And I get to, and I'm able to reach this more balanced place where both are equally present, both have my equal attention. I can feel them both profoundly and deeply, but neither are something that I would label as good or bad. When I'm in that state, they simply are. So I'm going to tell you a little story, though, about a moment I'm not too proud about as a chaplain, and I have permission to share this story. But at the moment when I realized there's a lot less wishy-washiness in my life. I mean, we all go through times of doubt, and we all go through times of, I know what I know. Don't I know it? We all go through that, but it's less and less frequent for me. And I told you in the story how some of my friends or colleagues sometimes struggle with this thing where, you know, we don't have to inflict our theology upon anyone else. So somebody came up to me in the hospital and asked me, what does COVID-19 do to a person? And at first, I kind of started off as if I had this badge on, right? And started with this very clinical, you know, kind of thing. And then, and see, this is why we don't typically serve as a chaplain and a nurse in the same place. And then I looked down at my badge and I was like, oh, phooey, I'm a chaplain right now. And so I stopped myself and I said to the person, that's something a doctor or a nurse would say. I'm so sorry. You're not asking me this as a doctor or nurse. You're asking me what COVID-19 does to a person as a chaplain, right? And the person nodded their head. And a more skilled approach would have been to ask the person, well, what do you think COVID-19 does to a person? You know, or a person's spirit, as I had clarified with the person. I'm like, are you talking about a person or a spirit or a person's spirit? And they had said spirit. So a more skilled approach would have been to ask them what it does to a person's spirit. But it just came out of me was my own theology, my own belief about this and a person's spirit and what COVID-19 does to a person's spirit. So I looked her straight in the eye at that moment and I said, what COVID-19 does to a person's spirit is absolutely nothing. Absolutely nothing. Luckily, I caught myself and said, what do you think? Which kind of almost saved the day. But it was a very profound moment for me in that I realized I can't wait to get this RN badge off. I can't wait for this to be over so I can do that and serve as a chaplain and not have these moments of trying to switch from one role to the other. I gave myself a little pat in the back for doing it in these circumstances, but most of all, that spiritual realization on a very, very deep, beyond intellectual level that COVID-19 does nothing to a person's spirit. And so I thank you for listening, and may the God of your understanding bless you this day.